Gentlemen, welcome to another combat veteran, react video, but this is the cool part. Tomorrow's Christmas, and that means that we are checking out a Christmas video. This is a much requested topic. This is the band SABATON, and this is their recently released video, Christmas Truce. Think I know this story, pretty iconic, but let's get into it. I wonder, so what we're seeing here, it looks like German, we saw the pickle helm, or the pickle cube, and then you also have the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I think these are supposed to be Austro-Hungarian troops, because I've never seen that sort of hat. They may be Russian troops as well. I'm trying to ID I think I can ID the weapons, wow. Okay, I think that looked like a Vickers machine gun. It looked like one of the British-made machine guns. Grenade! So in World War I, the trenches would definitely not have been close enough to each other to throw hand grenades, right? It would have been just too unstable a situation, right? To have that short a distance, there would have been a push to take one of the trenches, you know, because remember, the appeal of no man's land was that it was a large area devoid of cover and concealment, so that when offensive pushes happened, there was an opportunity for the enemies or the troops in their trench to gun down from a safe position the attacking troops. So you would never have two trenches so close that they could have hand grenades thrown. Oh, I understand. Okay, that's probably why we saw the British-style machine gun, was because it's the video is cutting between the two sides.
Come on, man. Wake up. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Amidst! Come on!
Yeah, so one of the things that I did not appreciate about the First World War until I really dug into the history was how many World War II casualties or soldiers never had their bodies recovered, and they were just status unknown for years until the end of the war, until it sort of became obvious that they had been killed, and how many bodies were unrecoverable. And so you would end up with a lot of informal graves, sometimes over territory that had been conquered and reconquered, and so often it would simply be, here lies a soldier found in a French uniform, here lies a soldier found in a German uniform. And then, of course, you would have regiments, or what do they call them, like musters of units, where you would see large numbers of soldiers were just not reporting for duty. And so it was sort of assumed that they were killed, but there were families that, you know, simply didn't get a chance to know what happened to their loved one in this war. And it's one of the reasons that after this, you saw a bunch of law of war regulations, including a lot that have to do with the repatriation of remains and the identification of remains. That's a formalized process now to ensure that the sort of unidentified bodies piling up and unknown fates of soldiers don't happen again. Okay, one thing that is interesting, you can see these metal crosses here. I think those are actually tank traps. So probably, I don't believe they would have existed in 1914. Also, I don't know if this is going to get copyright claimed, so we'll see if this makes me any money or not. Okay, don't know if anyone would have had the mohawk haircut in World War I, but people do strange things in trenches, right? You spend enough time sort of in isolation, and individual companies or groups will do all kinds of preposterous stuff just to sort of keep themselves entertained. Ah, man, that's a true to accurate boots. Those are Kirza style boots. So I think this is meant to be maybe a Russian trooper or a Russian soldier, because they have those high, almost knee-high parade boots. And that was because, of course, having a single watertight leather boot when walking around in a muddy environment like the trenches meant that keeping water out was essential to maintaining the health of your feet. Because again, if you are there for like a rainy season or a cold and rainy season, even a little bit of water in your socks inside your boots can just trap them and turn your feet into not just a mess, but literally damage them very severely.
Silence. Oh, I remember the silence.
Yeah, one of the things that's so heartbreaking about World War I and World War II was the lack of communication with the front. Remember, this was when the telegraph was relatively new technology. And the consequence of this was that or widespread use of the telegraph, or radio was actually the newer technology, but the telegraph was not that common and was a very advanced form of infrastructure. And so you relied on good old snail mail to get personal messages from families to troops. Well, as we discussed, at that time, it was a struggle to identify soldiers who had been killed and where and when they died, let alone to get messages to and from families. So often you would simply go months without knowing where, again, your family, your young children, what was happening to them.
On a cold winter day, after many months on the battlefield, and we were used to the violence, then all the cannons went silent, and the snow fell. Voices sang to me from no man's land. We are all friends. And today we're all brothers, tonight we're all...
Yeah, it's okay. So one of the things that's really one of my favorite themes that doesn't get explored enough is sort of the universality of the combat experience, right? I would love to talk to, say, a Russian soldier who served in Syria, which, ironically enough, Russian military police were tremendously relied upon by the Russian armed forces in Syria for the exact reasons the U.S. relied on the military police, right? Their ability to sort of seamlessly transition from combat troops to law and order, and their proficiency in dealing with, distinguishing between a rowdy and unruly civilian and a combat threat is essential. But sometimes you ask yourself, you're like, would that person, right, would they understand parts of you that your own countrymen don't, right? Like the average American going to the mall. And I think there's some truth to that, right? It's one of the things that really I've loved about the later half of the Metal Gear Solid series, where Kojima really started to explore that theme of is the profession of arms, is fighting in wars such a distinct experience that it separates you from the civilians that may speak your language and purport to be your countrymen, but is that experience so distinct that you have more in common with the people you fight than the people you fight for.
Friends are a moment of peace in a war that never ends. Today we're all brothers, we drink and unite. Now Christmas has arrived and the snow turns the ground white. Hear carols from the trenches, we sing a holy.
Okay, I don't know why the closed captioning is Vietnamese, but I love it. Vietnamese, yeah, look at that, huh? Weird. I'm into it.
Our guns play to the stomp of snowflakes. Our Christmas in the trenches, our Christmas on the front, far from home.
Love his look of shock.
Madness, how I remember the sadness. We were hiding our tears in a foreign land where we faced our fears. We were soldiers, carried our
Oh, because the reason the uniforms are so disparate is because they're a British formation, so they would have soldiers from many different regiments in the trenches. Okay, I don't think they would literally be shoulder to shoulder like that. I guess they could be if the war was if it was like an offensive that was going badly enough that soldiers would just get cross-leveled continuously till you ended up with some sort of like mishmash.
on our shoulders.
Yeah, one of the things that's crazy about hearing histories of World War I was it was so brutal. It was countries had never really seen a total war like that, where the entire national consciousness tries to defeat the enemies, right? Before, wars were largely private affairs that were much like wars today, small professional armies engaging in political sort of warfare that was much lower in intensity, but for very narrow and discrete objectives, usually like control of specific territories that had economic or political value. And the shift really started around the Napoleonic era, but fully came to fruition in the First World War. But the First World War was such a vicious stalemate and seemed to be going nowhere, so much that the soldiers that fought in these wars in different countries at different times became so disenfranchised that many regiments later in the war, in both French, Russian, German, would engage in open rebellion and often tell their officers they refused to fight. The French, for a time, had large numbers of regiments refusing to fight. And there was also a lot of abusive practices at this time, right? You have to think about how bad working conditions were in the early industrial era, and you can reasonably extrapolate those to the military, right? The military would have extremely draconian leave policies, extremely draconian punishments. With minimal paperwork, officers could execute soldiers they thought had been derelict in their duties, and this was universal. This was not a Russia or Austro-Hungarian specific policy. And so these soldiers did, late in the war, start to, at times rebel on a battalion-wide basis. And it's one of the reasons that the Russian Revolution took place, a huge driver. Just the massive casualties for really minimal, meaningful gain, or for what felt like making moves on a chessboard just was not not something those soldiers were willing to tolerate.
Hear carols from the trenches, we sing a holy night. Our guns lay to rest on the snowflakes. Our Christmas in the trenches, our Christmas on the front, far from home.
I mean, there's one thing that I love about metal, is that it unapologetically is just like leans hard on musicianship, right? It's like, listen, if you don't expect a lengthy guitar or drum solo, like, you're at the wrong kind of concert. And I appreciate the fact that it's like, this is a pleasure to do if you're a guitarist. And so I appreciate that the genre just accepts that it's like, listen, whether it's like a good pop song or not, this is something that you're going to be listening to. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's so surreal to think about with the First World War is how culturally similar these countries were. Germany and France, right, are separated, of course, by a language barrier and certainly some cultural barriers, but very, very little about the world pre-World War I Europe would have found the average person isolated from Germany, France, or the continent, right? It would have been expected for middle class or upper middle class residents of these countries to have spent time in the other capitals, in Berlin, in Paris, in London. And so it must have been very surreal to attempt to conquer a city where you had gone as a tourist, right? And I've had some friends that have spent a lot of time in places, especially Aleppo in Syria, and it's like heartbreaking for them to actually see the photos, to know that the Aleppo that they saw and that was such like a welcoming city to them is completely obliterated, and that many of the people who showed them so much kindness were dead, right? Yeah, so one of the things that's actually interesting is I believe that this truce actually lasted for a few days beyond Christmas. Because again, we got to remember at this time, practicing the 12 days of Christmas was probably the norm. So Christmas was seen as more of a 2-week celebration. But it would actually probably have gone on longer because of how exhausted both troops were from fighting. And they actually had to have officers quite forcibly get the troops back into the trenches and prepared for combat. Which is honestly, in its way, I think more tragic. Oh, look at that. That's a classic Enfield, right? Imagine having to like kill your classmates, right, from high school, or once you have a personal bond with someone, it's obviously harder to do harm to them, right? That's like, you guys have watched the Tarkov streams on the other channel, you know that just having some sort of communication with a player vastly increases or decreases the likelihood that you will end up in a gunfight with them, which is strange. Oftentimes we don't even speak the same language. And the chat always jokes that charisma 10 out of 10, but the truth is just humanizing yourself to someone makes them more likely to engage with you in a generous way.
Walk among our friends, we don't think about tomorrow. The battle will commence when we celebrate to Christmas. We thought about our friends, those who never made it home when the battle had commenced.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be so surreal if you were a British soldier or a French soldier to, by 1925, you could visit Paris. What's even interesting to me is Robert Oppenheim, the father of the Manhattan Project, studied for years in Germany in the interwar years, in the early 30s, right? And so it's completely possible, though his ages didn't quite work out, that there could have been people who fought against the Germans or who even marched as conquerors through Berlin, and then a few years later it was back studying at their universities. Guys, that was awesome. That really was great. I enjoyed that so much. Let me know if you want me to see me do some more Sabaton videos, and also just like what a cool story. That really is one of my favorite stories, sort of capturing the universality of being a soldier at a level sort of below the political, right? And other than that, guys, man, hit subscribe, but more importantly, have a good holiday, really. Take the time, spend it with your families, stay safe, and I will see you guys. Well, I have some more videos this year, of course, but really, 2022 is going to be a huge year. I hope you guys are excited. I am so excited, and I will see you guys in the next one.